Employees are voting with their feet. They're looking for more from their employer. Those organisations who don't focus on this, as you like to say, Scott, and I completely agree, I don't think we'll be around for much longer. You know, people are not going to work for those organisations anymore.
Welcome back to the mental space, where we love having conversations about mental health and well-being. Today's guest is an old friend and a mental health champion, none other than Chris Cummings, who is the Group CEO of Wellbeing at Work World. Chris, welcome to the mental space.
Thank you for having me, Scott. It's great to see you again.
Brilliant. I mean, we've known each other for a few years. This is the first time you've actually been on Mental's new podcast. So I'm delighted to have you here after all the support you've given us in the past. And now, if you don't know, Wellbeing at Work holds conferences all around the world. And soon they'll be returning to the region with the 7th edition of the Wellbeing at Work Summit Middle East. It's a bit special this year, though, isn't it, Chris?
It is. I mean, it's been an exciting journey in the Middle East. We started, say, 7 years ago, and it's just great to see how far we've come in the UAE, especially over that period. This year we're bringing the summit to Riyadh as well. So we've got 2 in-person locations, continuing our work in Dubai and seeing that flourish, but bringing that message to Riyadh as well, which is really exciting to go to the KSA.
Well-being scaling up in the region, that's fantastic. Well, I mean, look, you said something interesting there that I'd like to pick up on. You said, you know, it's been great to see how far we've come in the UAE over the last 7 years. If we start there, just kind of from that local for us perspective, international for you, of course, how far do you think the UAE has come? I mean, how have things changed from your perspective?
Well, if I look back over the last 7 years, I think the first 4 years it was slow progress, like many areas of the world. I think in the last 3 years we've really seen that accelerate, and we're certainly seeing leaders now really take this seriously off the back of what we all went through with COVID. However, I say that with a caveat. There's still a lot of conversation and awareness, but the numbers and the stats are showing deterioration in levels of burnout and in well-being. So, you know, it's time for action. We've done a lot of awareness building. We know the importance of a focus in this area. Let's now put that awareness into action and really make some thriving workplaces in the region.
How much is what's happening here in this region then mirroring, leading or lagging what's happening, you know, around the world? Because you're in Australia, you're in the US, you know, obviously you're in the UK and London, and I have to say it's tipping it down with rain here today. So the minute I organise a conversation with you, you bring the weather.
Well, hopefully that changes in the next few weeks by the time I get there.
It doesn't last long. It never lasts long. So from that kind of that sort of local versus international perspective, well, is the UAE mirroring the global trend? Is it leading in some spaces? Is it lagging some spaces?
Yeah, I think it does mirror many other regions of the world. I think there was a lot of short-term thinking, and understandably so, during the COVID period. Organisations wanted to support their staff. There was lots of short-term fixes. I think as we come out of COVID now, organisations are starting to think more longer term and starting to think a bit more strategically. Yes, there was some support, and we needed to do that quickly during COVID. But now, you know, the evidence around leadership, around culture, around purpose. Obviously, we've got a huge talent war going on as well. Organisations are really thinking more strategic now, and that's great to see. We need more companies to think like that. There's a few in the region and around the world. I think we will start to see that really accelerate over the coming months and years, and it has to, because employees are voting with their feet. and that they're looking for more from their employer, and those organisations who don't focus on this, as you like to say, Scott, and I completely agree, I don't think we'll be around for much longer. It's people are not going to work for those organisations anymore.
No, I mean, look, it's an interesting one, because the cynical boss, and I'm going to try not to boss. I'm sure in both our dim and distant past, we worked for bosses who, have taught us many things, not necessarily good things, but they taught us many things. So if I'm being a bit cynical, I think we'll see bosses looking at the downturn and looking at the recession, and I think we'll probably have in the UK, and we look to the US, and there's talk of a shallow recession out there. I got a sneaking suspicion, actually. I think this part of the world is gonna escape that, and actually I think it's going to be really positive, because of the sort of the ambition and the economic activity that's out here. But when we take that argument and go, okay, it's a downturn, and we look around the world, we see lots of the tech giants who possibly overstaffed or possibly underestimated how long the kind of coronavirus growth bump in tech would go. But there's a lot of people losing a lot of jobs, internationally. What's the message to those kind of employers? Because I saw there's a great HR recruiter the other day, Justin McGuire. He was talking about, employees will remember how they were treated even during a recession, in the same way that employees remembered how they were treated during COVID. And that point where the economy snaps back, possibly for your region, I still say my caveat is I think this region will be better, but they're storing themselves up for a big problem, aren't they? If they take this very short term, because recessions never last. We know that the good times will return. Markets are cyclical, and I've asked you a really long-winded question. I'm actually going to let you answer it now.
Well, I think there's 2 points. One, you're absolutely right. I think wellbeing should be the top of the agenda. You would expect me to say that anyway, being in this market. But the reason being is it's linked to performance. So if you want the best possible performing team, then, and we all want that, we all want high productivity, we all want highly engaged teams that produce excellent results, then investing in a very, very small investment really in comparison to what other investments you have to make as a business, it's really it's an essential part of a downturn. But secondly, and I've lived through quite a number of recessions now. It's not my first or second.
As have I, but yeah.
And
we're not Gen Zs, that's for sure.
No, unfortunately not. But again, the results show after every recession, if you cut to the bone and really reduce your workforce significantly, the way you bounce back, you might have a short-term win in terms of cost saving, but the bounce back, when it does come back, as you say, will be lagged. And there's a real, there's plenty of far cleverer people than me, economists, who have the data and the all of the evidence to show that. Of course, I understand, when things get tough, people are obviously the biggest investment an organization make, and in some cases you have to reduce that. But it's really not the answer to just work towards one annual report to make that look good, because the following 2 or 3 annual reports after that are not going to look great at all. So I really think, if I take a leaf out of my own book, we haven't reduced our team at all. Yes, we're facing challenging times, but we know what we need to continue to grow, and we're actually expanding and taking more people on. So that's the way I think organisations should approach it.
I mean, there's so much I could get into with you, and we've not got hours and hours. Burnout is very high on the agenda right now. And when we saw the headlines around Jacinda Ardern, you know, one of the most talented, brightest, intelligent leaders we've ever seen, stepping down from the prime ministership of New Zealand, citing burnout. Here in the region, and I'm just going to throw a couple of stats at you as well, Chris. You know, we had the Cigna Wellbeing 360 survey out earlier this year. Burnout, 98% of people suffering from at least one symptom of burnout. A Bupa survey as well, which looked at the executive, looked at the C-suite, and they actually coined a term called the boss loss, which is that 94% of bosses were also citing burnout, 20% of them acute burnout. Why have we got this? I mean, this sort of acceleration that doesn't seem to be slowing down at all? And how important is it for us to kind of put the brakes on this, because people are burning out far, far too quickly?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point I made earlier. I think during COVID, we did some short-term fixes, and obviously that supported people in the short term. I think we have to have a much wider conversation. The odd webinar here and there on sleep is not going to fix this. We need to have a root and branch strategic look at wellbeing. And so that goes across all touch points of an organization. It's not just having a workshop on mental health for 1 hour and then ticking that box and moving forward. You know, we've got to look at the whole organization, the culture, the job design, the leadership, how many people have we got working on a particular team? Do we have enough? So often people are saying we haven't got enough people in our team to do what we need to do. So, you know, we have to look at this in its entirety, instead of just ticking boxes on the side, because that just, the results are a growing number, and these are horrific stats. I mean, 98% of people experiencing at least one symptom of burnout. Do we really want a workforce in that state? So, yeah, I you know, like I say, there are some great companies out there looking at this far more holistically and strategically. We just need more of them.
I had a conversation recently with somebody who was like, do you know what, I'm all for well-being, and I'm all for mental health, but in terms of their company, and I won't say which one it was, they're working probably at about 120, 130% capacity. So they're not even working at 100%. You know, they're not quite quitting. They're already going above and beyond every day. And then their company turns around and says, right, we want you to now find time for a 2-hour mental health webinar. I just like, you know, so, but leeway, no, well, yeah, if I'm going to be taking 2 hours, then do I get any special consideration on deadlines and that sort of thing? So in fact, actually quite often this tick boxing exercise can be counterproductive, because people are already stressed and they're already short of time, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay. Give us an idea of some of the things, anyone who rocks up to the Wellbeing at Work Summit Middle East, what are they going to hear? What are they going to learn? What are they going to take away from it this year, do you think? What's some of the overriding trends?
Well, we've created a framework internally now that we use to inform all of our content, and it covers specific areas. So leadership, personalization, which I think is that it is going to be a big area for well-being. So really thinking about the individual instead of it just being a one-size-fits-all. Equity is another area. Again, big area for that influences our well-being. Environment, so where we work and the wider environment piece is important as well. Purpose. You know, what is the individual's purpose? What's the organization's purpose? So just really bringing those experts together, hearing what others are doing within organizations that's working really well, and ultimately being able to come and spend time with your peers and share those challenges. I think This is such a lonely journey when you're leading on well-being within an organization. You're trying to get leadership to buy in. You're trying to develop something that there isn't really a rule book. It's still quite a young industry. So coming along and meeting other heads of HR who are having the same challenges, and just being able to share that, and hopefully, come away from some of those workshops and round tables where you've learned something that you can take away and implement within your organization. But yeah, it's a friendly, safe environment where people can share. So we really
psychologically safe environment.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I know you've got Emma coming from the Evolve Network. She's fantastic from Massively, but always strikes me that quite often we're not very sympathetic for an employee to the HR department. A bad HR department is often just policy police. But increasingly, I've seen HR departments, all of a sudden, the leadership's looking to them for mental health guidance. The teams are looking to them for mental health guidance. Often, the employees can be really, really struggling, and HR people are the first place that everyone turns to. Now, but nobody made HR people mental health specialists. So they're having to shoulder a lot of pressure from above, a lot of need from below, and who's looking after them, but also how are we bringing well-being into workplaces so that it's not just funneling through one single department. It needs to be democratized throughout organizations, no?
Absolutely. This is not just a HR responsibility, it's an organization responsibility. And we are there as an event organizer to support HR, to provide them the tools, to provide them the support. Some of our workshops end up being therapy sessions, actually, where everyone shares all of the challenges that they're facing. But we want to empower them to go back to their organization and really develop that holistic strategic view. And you're absolutely right. Line managers, leadership, employees, everyone is responsible for well-being within organizations. And we have to start thinking like that to have a strategic approach and a successful approach.
It still feels, as far as we've come, that we're still kind of stuck in this stigmatized scenario. Yeah, how do we tackle that? Because look, we need the leaders, and I know we've got some very frightened leaders as well right now, because they look like me. You're a bit younger than me, Chris. They've never been taught the value of emotional intelligence, and they've just been about delivering the P&L. Learn the procedures, learn the policies, deliver the profits. Inspiring teams was never really part of the conversation. And they never really needed to, because they had a lot of levers they could pull in terms of fear. And here in the UE, it's interesting because we've seen the UE taking the fear factor off the table. We've had golden visas and we've had green visas, which are 5-year visas, which anybody that's earning over 15,000 dirhams and got a degree can get. We've got unemployment insurance that's coming next year. We've got labour courts, which are increasingly more open to people taking, their employers to court. So the landscape's changing. How do we reach those bosses and go, do you know what? Stop with the fear, not just with your teams, but with yourself over well-being?
Well, if they're a boss worth their salt, they would have seen the figures, because if they're leading their organization the way they are, they would have seen a massive shift in talent. People are voting with their feet. We're not in that environment where we're going into a recession. Like if I think back into the UK in 20, 30 years ago, where everyone just kept their head down and worked in the same organization and didn't question anything. We're in a new world now, and workers are questioning everything: lifestyle, location, how many times I have to be in the office, what sort of culture, what sort of purpose. What do I want? Really is what employees are saying now, and workers are saying. And so, you would have noticed that if you're a good leader. If you're not a very good leader and you haven't noticed it, well, again, go back to your point, you're probably not going to be around for much longer, because you're going to have
Yeah.
a real problem attracting talent.
Yeah, and we can see it already. I mean, again, to quote that Cigna research, like last year, they asked people, like, how many of you would like, are planning on quitting your job to find, better work-life balance? 50% said yes, we're planning to quit. And you could see, you could almost feel the eye rolling from the leaderships, which is like, yeah, well, they would say that. That's a survey. This year, they went back to to check on that. How many actually followed through and pulled the trigger? 4 out of every 5 who said they were going to quit. And there's a great lady here, Bobby Hartshorn, who I quote her a lot, where she goes, if you think about that in terms of a resource, that's 40% of your entire organization. But it's not just 40%. That's your most talented 40%, who are the most able to move around. So you're losing a massive part of talent. And if we're looking moving forward, and again, I read recently the US CEO of PwC said the war on talent's over, talent won.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I guess my question again is, if that's the landscape we're in, does once upon a time, sorry, it takes me a while to get to me questions because I'm old, Chris, but it feels like there's a changing compact now between employer and employee. Once upon a time, 30, 40 years ago, it was like, I'm the employer, but I'm going to give you stability. I'm going to give you a job for life, and I'm going to help you lift you out of, from poverty to a better way of living, or you'll be able to send your kids to school. You'll be able to feed. It was stability. And you'll work 5 days a week, and you'll get the entire weekend off, and you'll never hear from me. Your nights are your nights, and that's it. Now it almost feels like paid employment's a Ponzi scheme, which is only benefiting the people at the top of it. And that stability is no longer there. So is that another factor in that we're all beginning to realize, hang on, I've got to be a bit selfish here. And that idea of loyalty really, really has to be earned. It can't just be expected.
Yeah, I agree. I think COVID played a big part in that as well. I spoke to many very, very busy executives who, for the first time in their lives, were not at an airport rushing to their next meeting and running around doing 17-hour days. They stopped. They spent time with their family, and they actually quite enjoyed it. And they said to themselves, do you know what? I'd like to do more of this. And I think, seeing a global pandemic and all of the horrendous, passings that we saw, everyone, it was that jolt to people to say, actually, I really want to make the most of my life. I really want to do something with my life. I want to have purpose in what I do. You mentioned the Cigna survey. Gallup have done a number of surveys and with a focus on the Middle East as well, and around why people are leaving, and that purpose, that feeling as though you're doing something positive to the world is really important. So yeah, I think it's not all doom and gloom. As I say, that there's lots of there's positive organisations out there who are doing great things. I just think we need to switch this what I consider old-fashioned way of thinking, and really move towards where Gen Z and Gen Y are, and what they're asking for in interviews and what they expect from their employer. And not just that generation, actually. I think I'm seeing that a lot more in guys in their guys and girls in their 50s saying, actually,
basically people like me, people that look like you.
But it's like
I wholeheartedly agree. Like there are. And I know I'm a classic example of it, which is like went through the pandemic, got to spend time with my kids, got dragged back in the office. I've now launched Mentl. I'm now my own business person. I am one of those Great Resignation type kind of. And I'm just, it's the best thing ever. And all of a sudden, people my age can go, do you know what? like in my case, I worked for other people for 33 years. 33 years before I woke up and went, do you know what? I want to actually do something that gives me purpose, as you say. And I think you're right in that there's a lot of people, particularly through the pandemic, they just woke up and went, what? Well, what? And I'm gonna be on this treadmill till what? I'm 65, and then I'm gonna have a tiny pension. No thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
So give us a little bit more about what we can expect. I know our time, the clock is ticking out. It's 21st to the 23rd of February. Yeah, I believe you're starting in Riyadh first, yes, and then you're coming into Dubai. But give us a little bit more about what people can expect to see from the Wellbeing at Work Summit.
Well, some inspirational content. We don't just talk about well-being; we experience it as well. So your experience at the conference is not going to be back-to-back PowerPoints. It's going to be lots of well-being focused environment with fantastic food and energizers throughout the day. Lots of really good workshop style content and learning opportunities, and as I say, fantastic networking in the sunshine, which looking out the window here in the UK, I'm hopeful it's going to be a lot warmer than what it is here in the UK, I can assure you. But yeah, a really good, really exciting, action orientated environment, a safe space for HR leaders to share and to meet and to widen your network as well, and have that support network.
I'm going to go a bit Stephen Bartlett on you before we close up the podcast, which is, I mean, I'm always interested because people ask me my whys. Why did I get into this? And I'm very happy to talk about this. Where did your passion for this space come from? Was it through a lived experience? Was it through work? What put you on this path to championing wellbeing at work?
It's actually my partner's condition and subsequent poor treatment at work, really. I was minding my own business in the corporate world, and I saw what happened at home. And I thought, actually, there's got to be a better way of working. Surely we shouldn't be making our workers sick. And that's what's happening. Yeah. So, quit my corporate role and embarked on this crazy journey that I've been on for the last 8 or 9 years to try and bang the drum on the importance of wellbeing at work. Thankfully, back then the conversation was quite a challenge, and thankfully that's moved on, and now it's about, let's keep it top of the agenda. It's got that awareness, certainly through the last 2 or 3 years. It should remain right at the top of the agenda, and that's our aim. As
ever, fantastic to see you again, Chris. Can't wait for the Wellbeing at Work Summit. I'm very proud as well, in our first year at Mentl, that we're partnering with you as well, and we'll see people at the conference, and hopefully you might even see me on stage and I'll get to ask you a few questions. But delighted to be supporting you, and great that you're bringing the conference back. Congratulations on it being Saudi Arabia and Dubai this year. And in listeners, if you're tuning in, we're going to put a link in the show notes to where you can find tickets or register for your place if you're a HR individual and are interested in attending both Riyadh and in Dubai. And we might even get you a discount for you. We'll see. I'll try and twist Chris's hand on that one. But thank you for listening. And once again, Chris, thank you for joining us on the Mentl Space.
Thanks for having me.